Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko, former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. I am the co founder and CEO of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, digital marketing agency that focuses on the immigration and global mobility industry. Today is episode number 139, and our guest today is a global mobility and immigration colleague turned friend over the years, Karen Cygal. Karen is the CEO of a company called Global IQ. For any of you who are in the global mobility industry, and especially if you have been involved with the Worldwide ERC organization for years, you probably remember and know Karen from when she was at that organization and at previous positions. Karen has been in the industry for a long time. But as somebody who is a math and data professional at heart, she went into private practice over the last couple of years to bring data analysis and data. Data really, which we'll talk about to the HR and global mobility space with her company Global IQ. Before we get started, I want to give a quick thank you to the episode's main sponsor, DocketWise, or 8 a.m. DocketWise, as they're called now. So DocketWise is an end-to-end immigration case management platform. DocketWise provides really best-in-class immigration forums. It's one of the things that people really use them for the most. Customizable questionnaires in a lot of different languages for clients that speak anything from around the world. Industry leading integrations, including with my company Laborless. Really great customer service. I've known the team for years, and one of the things I really love about DocketWise is that they have invested over the years in content and resources for immigration lawyers in the industry more broadly. So they've got a really great blog, they've got an ebook out now, they've got their own podcast. They support this show and other things across the industry. So I'm really grateful to them. So if you're an immigration law firm or an in-house team, that's looking for your own, immigration sort of case management or form management type of software, check them out. So their website is 8am, number 8am.com/DocketWise, or use the link in the show notes and tell them that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So without further ado, Karen, thank you so much for being here. And I'm super excited to, talk to you and learn more about not just your story, but, everything you're building with Global IQ.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I kind of stumbled there because I was like, data analysis, data, it's data. I mean, you are a data person, and your sort of data is I remember a couple of years ago, I was at either an ERC conference or something else, and I distinctly remember a panel talking about how, I think it was entitled "Data is the New Oil," and so the idea that who is data rich is, info knowledge rich, and then through that, money rich. And money rich could be selling services, but it can also be at an organization making the right decisions and cutting costs or being more efficient. So I'm excited to dive into that. Before we get to all of that, I love diving into the guest story and their life. I think it's really cool to find out about who is this person and, why is it them, right? Why did they start this business? So can you talk a little bit about, kind of, I don't know, where did you grow up? Are you from New Jersey? You're a Northeast,
I
friend?
am. I
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
was born in New Jersey and have lived here most of my life. Um, Really traveled a lot for work in my 20s. So never really relocated, but traveled significantly. So kind of did a lot of Europe and Asia for those years. But I am a New Jersey native, and I live in New Jersey with my family now.
All right. How do you feel about New York, New Jersey rivalry quickly? Or you don't feel there is one?
Uh, I guess there is one, but when you work in New York, I commuted to New York for a good
Sure.
amount of my career too. So you kind of, I think a lot of that just goes by the wayside when you're so connected to both sides of it.
Because the other day I landed in Newark and somebody's flight was, a few people missed their flights because connections got screwed up and they were waiting for their luggage. And someone said, well, I might as well, I'm in New York, I might as well explore. And I said, hold on a minute, buddy. You're not in New York, my friend. You were in Newark. And then the lady next to me, she said, this guy's probably from New York if he said that. And I said, I sure am.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so you grew up in New Jersey.
Mhm.
You know, I know that you obviously, we'll get there. You went to, you studied math and econ and poli sci in college, in undergrad, and then you went to NYU to get a master's in economics. Were you always sort of, you know, for lack of a better word, like a math nerd? I mean, I went to Russian math school as a kid, but is this something that you always loved to do? Did your family kind of, you know, force it upon you? Because it's good to know these things, you know?
No, you know what? I think I just really realized I was really good at math
Mm,
in like middle school age. And it was just something you're kind of, to be the math nerd, you're just getting hundreds on every test. And it was like, this is great. Maybe the other subjects, not so much, but and then it was just like, okay, well, now I have a passion for it because like I could see I was good at it. I was interested in it. So really just, it's funny how you just, and I think honestly, at some point, you start to look at the demographics. Like I wanted to do math and science as a girl, and you kind of always weren't pushed to do those things all
mm.
the time. So I think you push harder. At least I think that's the background I came from. Just to, if you're good at it and you love it, just keep pushing. So that's kind of, I and then I went to college thinking I would be a math major, and
Mhm.
then I had my first econ class, and I was like, okay, this is great because math is great, but when it's not applied, I think you start to realize, what am I doing with all of
Right.
these calculus classes, as
Yeah.
opposed to how can I help something? How can I build something? And I think that's kind of where I started going the economics path, really, was because you started to kind of understand, applications of it more, how you could model data, how you could use it differently. And that's kind of how, I progressed, I think, educationally and professionally, frankly.
When you, yeah, and we'll get to that because, you know, I studied economics in college as well. And so I have a lot of thoughts on that subject. You know, but before that, you know, when you were younger and you realized you were good at math, and obviously it's amazing that you went for it, especially looking around, as you said, and seeing maybe you were one of few girls in the class, and maybe, you know, the teachers were pushing the boys to go into math and engineering more, whatever you're seeing around you. Did
Sure.
you at the same time have any influences, maybe parents or family members or anybody who were kind of business owners, or was, you know, mostly what you saw kind of professionals, or maybe not even professionals, farmers? I don't know. Like what were you kind of seeing career wise around you as you were growing up?
Yeah, it's funny because when I was super young, my grandfather was always into, we would read the newspaper and you would look at the financial section and you would see the stock did well, the not, so you kind of started understanding that piece of
Mm,
it. But I don't think I really grew up around that. Like, my sisters and I are first generation college kids. So like my parents kind of were pushing us to go because they
mm,
wanted us to do what they did not do.
mhm.
So kind of pushing you in that direction. I don't think ever saying we want you to do this versus that. It was maybe go find yourself and kind of figure out what works for you with what you're good at.
And they probably felt, you know, go find yourself via education, right? I mean, it's you need to you finish college, go to college, finish it. And so did they push you towards math, or were you sort of self-motivated there because again, you realized you were good at it, et cetera?
Yeah, definitely self-motivated because I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I started to become one of those kids that took like your electives were math as
Yeah.
opposed to art,
Right.
and we're all good at something,
Yeah.
right? So you kind of just, focus on the things that are interesting.
Can I ask you one, I'm just curious to know your answer if you have one. Do you remember what you liked about it? Like, do you have a, you know, maybe as a young person, because I think math is one of these things that is really scary to a lot of people because they think that the barrier of entry is really high. But I find
Mm,
that sometimes you can find, I don't know, beauty or interest in math if it's explained to you a certain way, right? If
sure.
you understand it a certain way, which frankly, a lot of time comes down to teachers. But I'm wondering, do you have any, I don't know, memories or thoughts when you were younger thinking like, you know, I don't know, you look at a leaf and you're like, wait a minute, these are branches and the branches are whatever. You know what I mean?
I think well, it's kind of a couple questions in one
Sure,
there,
sure.
but you're solving a problem. And I think as a person, I solve problems. So with math, you were automatically like, here's the problem you're solving. And you're kind of bringing in a lot of things together to put something together to solve the problem. And I think I've had, there was probably two or three teachers, I think, one in more elementary school, middle school, one in high school and one in college, that really kind of helped shape my love for it, frankly, because they explained it really well. And I think they brought people along on their learning journey. So like it was just, I mean, just some really cool teachers with, I think, instructional methods that were super interesting and engaging.
Yeah, so when I went to university, I first majored in financial economics. Similar kind of, I grew up with, my parents were they're professionals. They were kind of computer programmers, as most post-Soviet, sort of families came to the US and got into computer programming. But my dad would watch stocks in the morning, and I kind of didn't know much about it, but it was just always around. And so I was just comfortable, like even just knowing some of the vocabulary, right, was more
Mhm.
than what other people knew. So, and I'm in New York. So many people work in finance. It's a financial center. And I ended up wanting to do that. And I went into economics. I also was pretty good at math when I was a kid, but partly because I went to Russian math school where like they told us if we didn't do this, we'd be failures in life. Like I was 12 years old, 13 years old, and they're yelling at us, telling us if we don't do this math, we're going to end up going to Kingsborough College and working in McDonald's our whole lives. No disrespect to either of those paths, but this is how the Russian,
Mhm.
like the post-Soviet, instruction was. So I was always ahead of everybody, and so similarly had hundreds. And I think it gave me a false sense of, whatever it might be, that math is my thing. Because when I went to college and I studied financial economics, I had the same epiphany as you. Math was interesting, but econ, the variables aren't there just to be, concepts or ideas. You can attach real world value to them, right? So
Mhm.
how much money you're paying your employees, what's your cost of doing business, how many widgets are you producing, whatever. And then you realize you could solve real world problems with math. And I always thought that was so interesting. And I feel like if I would if I were an economics department, maybe I'm unique and perhaps someone like you just intuited this right away. But I would have loved for my professor in Econ 101 to describe that to me in words, to say, look, math is this thing, but real world application math, is a way for you to use your skills or knowledge or interest in these
Sure.
like concepts to actually solve real world problems. And I don't think they ever said that, right? They just kind of jumped into it.
Yeah, they kind
So
of jump into supply and demand. And that,
right,
when
exactly.
you're 18 years old, that doesn't
Exactly.
exactly mean a whole lot to anybody, right?
Exactly. Totally. That's the supply and demand curve. The X, is the thing that everybody knows. And it's like, how's this relevant to me? I was
Right.
skateboarding yesterday. I just showed up at college, and now you're talking to me about supply and demand. I did end up
Well,
having
and
some really
again, I think
wonderful,
that's such a narrow piece of it.
right,
Like all of that has so many more applications, and they introduce you to one where I do think a lot of people take it because they have to.
right.
And then it's like a one and done type thing if you're not really, I mean, I think the other part that shaped me is like how many, like I said, how many more calculus classes could I take? Or I think I started looking to your point of the financial services piece. So I
Hmm.
started like, should I take accounting? Should I,
Hmm.
because that's math too,
Right.
so, and I just, that was not for me like
Yeah.
that. So you had to keep kind of finding your way of how you were going to do something that you loved and like, and how you were going to continue it.
And the only thing I would add to that is I ended up personally double majoring and getting a degree in philosophy and politics. And I ended up reading, this was like my fourth year, fifth year in college. I took a victory lap. I ended up reading, a lot of the writers of political philosophy, and those people were also early economists,
Mhm.
right? John Adams, I mean, whomever. I don't
Yep.
even remember. John Rawls, was that a guy? I
Yeah.
feel like
Yep.
that's a name that was
Mhm.
familiar. Bertrand Russell, the names are coming back to me.
Oh, that's really
If
funny.
that makes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but like
Well, I also took political economy. So it's like,
cool, yeah.
it kind of all weaves itself together.
What did you take first, economics or philosophy, or like political economy?
Um, my degrees were mathematical economics,
Right.
and then political economy was second.
Okay, gotcha.
And
See,
it was kind of like, because a lot of those I had taken them as core, and then it was, well, you could get a double major
right.
if you take a few more. So I kind of took the
That's
ones that
exactly
were
that's
more related to economics than just
literally exactly what I did.
politics.
That's so funny. And
Yeah.
see, from my perspective, when I started taking those classes the second time around, I thought to myself, I would have loved to learn this first. I would have loved to read, Commonwealth or one of these books first to hear what these people have to say about, the economy and how things work and how humans make decisions with their words, and then apply mathematical concepts to that. Like, to me,
Mhm.
that makes more sense than the other way around. But maybe you and I should create a task force and go around
I
and
know, right?
fix university
Fixing the
programs for
education system.
exactly. All right, that'll be the next career. Okay, so you finished that, and then I guess, did you go to get a master's directly after your undergrad?
I so I started working at a financial services company directly out of my bachelor's, and
Okay,
then I went for my master's at night, um, for kind of full time, but at night, so that
right,
I was doing a lot of like the tuition reimbursement, so I wouldn't have a huge debt
nice,
coming out of it. So I kind of
brilliant.
did both at the same time for about a year and a half,
And then,
and I went to NYU.
and you went to NYU, and were you working at a, financial, like a bank or a, you know,
I worked at an asset management company, but
okay,
kind of doing a lot of like mutual fund accounting.
okay,
So kind of looking at the stock market kind of all
right.
day, and kind of seeing where stocks were going to end and kind of what the makeups of different mutual funds were,
So, and
and kind of
very
how they would
different.
respond to the market. Yeah.
And that's something that they would, of course, want someone with an econ background doing, but obviously very different from what you ended up doing professionally. Because when you graduated NYU, you got a master's in economics, and then you landed a job at an organization at the time that was called ORC Worldwide. So you came in for the purposes of doing economic research and analysis and things like that. But this was a company that what was a relocation company?
They were a boutique HR data company. So they
Okay,
had, tons of consulting groups. So they had groups for like EEO, labor law, and then they had kind of like CHROs and things like that. So they had a lot of groups, meeting groups and roundtables and stuff like that. It had a full compensation services. So they
mhm,
had full comp surveys and that whole practice. And then there was an international compensation practice. So that was all of the mobility piece kind of in that group. And that was, all of your cost of living data, housing data, all of the data pieces, and then kind of the consulting around it.
and so did you know anything about, relocation or mobility? I mean, you're a New Jersey girl, you went to school, you went all the way to New York for masters, which is, I would say, relocation, but that's just me being a New Yorker. But so, and but you, I guess you weren't really exposed to this. So what was your experience like kind of getting into this industry? Was it interesting to you? Was it just one of the departments that you kind of supported? I mean, do you remember anything from that
Yeah.
time?
I think when I came out of so in my undergraduate, I was able to do an internship in Washington, D.C. at the U.S.
Cool.
International Trade Commission. So doing all of this cool like economic research on how different like trade agreements worked, were they working for the US and things like that. So I went for my master's, and then after my master's I was looking for a job that was cool like that. That
Mhm.
was really doing that type of stuff, and at that time the market was like just not there. I think looking for like those types of jobs were super limited at the time. And I
Mhm.
still wanted to do the economics piece, not get into the finance piece or other things. So I ended up like ORC was looking for somebody to just be like a data analyst. And I was like, you know what? Let me just see if this would work. And if nothing else, I can do it for a couple months, figure it out. So when I was interviewing there, the gentleman that was the executive vice president he's like, I really think you belong here. He's like, I think we could find a spot for you. He's like, but I just don't think this job's right for you.
Mm.
So I interviewed, I want to say with like 5 different people, 6 different people in different groups and stuff. And, they shifted people around to be able to bring me into the
Wow.
group that, yeah, it was kind of a very nerve-wracking experience at the time because it's your first kind of set of real interviews. And there were so many. Um, but then it ended up being a good fit because it was kind of in their, they called it the expenditure research group at the time, but really what they did was a lot of economic research building consumer expenditure models. So when you look at like the mobility data of how much people spend on goods and services and housing and taxes and all of that, that group actually built all those core models.
Wow.
So it was kind of a very cool fit, honestly, once I got there.
And you had to learn, I mean, so you had some experience, obviously, or exposure to international trade and this concept of things moving abroad. And in this case, this was humans, people moving,
Yeah.
cross border. But there's a cost to that too, right? There's a cost, and then there's also a benefit if you're placing someone at a company in another part of the world to lead a team or open an office or whatnot. And so just so I can understand, at the time, ORC were you hired by corporates to help them analyze data, or did you sort of aggregate, industry data and then produce reports, or maybe both, or something else?
Yeah. So ORC really, like for the international compensation piece, produced all of that and work with clients. So corporate HR folks would buy data from ORC and consulting.
Okay.
So we were producing cost of living allowances, housing allowances, all of that data. So we would work with, all multinational companies on kind of helping them put all of those pieces together to pay their employees. And that's actually what Global IQ does. So it's come full circle.
So you were doing this job. I mean, obviously, and by the way, so cool that a company, I was talking about this the other day of how I left legal practice, and before I started my company, Laborless, I worked at a fintech company in New York as well. After my time as an immigration lawyer, and I had interviewed, it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I interviewed for 2 immigration law firms on Monday and Tuesday, and I interviewed for this company, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. If you may know who they are because of your experience, DTCC. And I interviewed with them on Wednesday for kind of like an internal consulting team, almost like an in-house McKinsey, if you will. And the law firms, which is, I went to law school, I have a law degree, I know I did immigration law, and they were dragging their feet, in terms of giving me a job offer. And this third company, which is basically unrelated to anything, I guess maybe my financial econ background from college, they really wanted me. And I was just, I'm sharing this to say that it's sometimes, an outside party, a third party from outside of your bubble or outside of your circle may actually see something in you that's more than what you can see, and sort of, it's nice when a company, like I appreciate that this company said to you, look, Karen, we like you. We like what your background, we like your education. I'm sure they like your personality. Maybe they could see you managing people or whatever it might be. We want to make this work for you. I respect that. And I feel like it's cool that you leaned into it with them. Because I think, again, that could be, and it could be a path that maybe you wouldn't have taken otherwise, and it ended up being the right path.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I started there thinking, if nothing else, I'll just stick it out 6 months, because I kind of really, the bouncing around, and then finally what it settled on, I wasn't 100% sure what I was getting myself into. But honestly, I think the people at that organization were amazing. And, that kind of set the tone for me professionally, frankly, working there. There were plenty of people, senior level people, that were so willing to tell you everything they knew. So like, you came into the organization like, okay, I'm going to do some tax models, some economic models, and things like that. And, some of those senior people were like, okay, well, how do you apply that now? Like, this is how we're selling it to clients. This is how they use it. What do you want to know? And honestly, it was just this very cool pay it forward model, where they really, like, if you were willing to put in the work to work with them and do some of like the more junior level stuff, they were more than willing to, teach you everything they knew. So it was just, I think that set the tone for me professionally of how like I wanted to be as an employee, as a boss. And it was just a really nice working environment in that way.
And, to just related to that and how amazing people are in that industry, which, by the way, I certainly agree. We had a couple comments on Indeed. Chowdhury said, great to see 2 friends on the same screen. So again, our fellow immigration mobility attorney, and Marianne as well says, I love New Jersey, and EWR is a great airport. Marianne, also a global mobility professional. Marianne, I would agree with you that Newark was probably for a while the best airport of the 3 in the New York region. But since the LaGuardia redesign. If neither of you have been there, highly recommend flying into LaGuardia one day. It is a museum. It's beautiful. Just putting that out there. It's my local airport. So,
All
but yeah,
right.
thank you everybody for the comments. So okay, so you worked at ORC, amazing organization. You're learning a lot. You're building relationships with these senior managers and leaders, but ultimately the company, I guess, gets acquired, right? Or
Yeah.
your team does gets acquired, or what was the story
No,
there?
Mercer acquired
Right.
ORC.
And for
Valley.
folks who may not know, how because Mercer is a big player in the global mobility space, but I think a lot of folks in strictly immigration don't may
Sure.
not know about Mercer. Can you share a little bit about? I know it provides
Sure.
various services and things to organizations, especially ones that have large employee head counts. But
Sure.
what can you share a little bit about what Mercer did then, or perhaps does today?
Sure. So I think Mercer kind of broad scope is like an HR consulting company and a
Hmm.
data company. So they do all pieces of it. So they have a massive like compensation survey business. So when folks are benchmarking, their compensation job grades or their salaries for people when they want to do, increases for the year, or when they need to kind of reevaluate against a peer benchmark or things like that. That's a pretty large business, but they do consulting around those pieces. They do some of those broader um, sustainability. They do like the EEO stuff as well,
Hmm.
kind of all of so it's broad based HR and rewards consulting. And then there's kind of a data business that sits under each one of those.
Did you feel like this is a good move for you? I mean, here you are at a small company, you're now being acquired by this larger company that has more data at its disposal, perhaps more opportunities to grow or whatever. I mean, what were your thoughts during that time?
I think it was one of those you're not sure how it's going to go, because I think there's a part of you that was excited that there could be more opportunity because it was such a large organization.
Mhm.
But there were also people on the other side of that did exactly what you did.
True.
So Mercer already had a mobility business. And so like there were complementary businesses across what ORC offered and then what Mercer offered. So there was a whole kind of where do you fit in the current place, which was nerve wracking. Plus, it's like, okay, if you can figure this out, navigate it, there's a much bigger world than ORC. I mean,
Mhm.
and ORC was great, but Mercer was how many times the size of it. So
Right, right.
it was kind of you didn't know how it was going to go, I think.
So, I mean, let's talk about that a little bit because I know that was, after that, you obviously we'll talk about how you joined Worldwide ERC, and that was a big portion of the next step of your career. But you were at Mercer for 8 years.
Mhm.
What how did that change your perspective, or maybe your relationship to the industry, to the global mobility industry, or what are some things that maybe you got out of working now at a large organization that does data, does consulting? Because
Sure.
again, that's what you do now, right? As a startup. But what did you take away from that experience?
Um, a few things, honestly. I think when you look at the two businesses side by side, one was more like the ORC business was larger in North America and Asia, and Mercer was bigger in Europe. So you
Mhm.
actually, not that we didn't have a European business, but I think the business was larger there. So you really kind of started to educate yourself on a whole new population of business, and kind of, and each region kind of approaches mobility a little differently. So it was very cool to kind of see how the model worked there, their client interactions, and those types of things. Um, and I also, the other piece too, it's like I think when something's so large, it's hard to navigate. So, like with ORC and kind of coming full circle to Global IQ a little bit, you were 200 people globally, maybe just over that. So, if you wanted to work on labor law reports or kind of participate in that group, like if you were willing to put in the work, people were willing to say, yeah, sure, go right for it.
Mhm.
In a bigger company, you really kind of have to figure out, who are those people? How, if I want to
Sure.
be that, how do I express interest and things like that? So you really have to take a step back and focus, I think, and figure out what it is you want to do. What is your next steps? Like, did I want to stay in mobility? How was
Mhm.
I going to navigate that path for the time I was going to be there versus kind of maybe exploring other things. You have to be a lot more thoughtful, I think, because it takes more effort to be able to kind of tap into those broader pieces.
Yeah. What about, thinking about, because right now, and this is where I'm thinking about it. When I worked, I was an intern at, a couple of investment banks when I was in college. And, you know, could I say that I substantially took away a lot of knowledge? Probably something, but what I really took away more was navigating political, hierarchies within an organization,
Hmm.
knowing how to talk to people who are professionals, right? Knowing or figuring out, how do I approach someone if I need something, or how do I approach something to build a relationship, and frankly, now as a business owner, it makes me more comfortable to answer emails a certain way or to approach
For sure.
a prospective client, right? Which is something you have to be doing as well now, selling your
Hmm.
business. So yeah, it's those are soft benefits that I feel like when I talk to students a lot who are don't know what to pursue or where to go with their careers, and I always tell them like have internships at least, but work at a large organization, even if you hate corporations and et cetera, you can learn a lot about organizations in terms of people and documents. I'll share one small thing. I had a friend of mine who was like building a small business, and I remember thinking that he asked for my help with something. It was like 10, 12 years ago, a long time ago. And I just remember that the way that he organized data in his like Google Drive or something was such a mess. And I thought to myself, how could you, I mean, these should be in a folder together and these should be in a folder together. And how are you naming this? And I realized like, that's when I started to realize that I picked all that up through internships, right? Through working in a corporate environment where if
Yep.
there's no organization, the place falls apart. It has to be diligently organized. And then as a
Agreed.
small business, if you start with that from the ground up, it makes your business way more, I don't know, profitable, easy to manage, whatever positives you could pull out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the commercial and business aspect of working in an environment like that was critical to me being able to do global IQ. Because I think through all of it, it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing data, but no, you're not just doing data.
Right.
It's you're almost running like a mini business within these other businesses and things like that.
Yeah.
So you really were given those skill, you honed those skills of how to what we're and not to just make it about that, but it's like, what are your profit margins? How much money do we spend on this? How do we do this better for the clients? Like, so you're constantly kind of, even if it was, mobility is small for the bigger Mercer, but
That's
and
right.
even within mobility, each group almost worked in a way that you were kind of managing little smaller businesses within a business. So it was just kind of, I think, very eye-opening to work in that way, where I think ORC we didn't always kind of look at all of the pieces of that to run the business. Here it
Yeah.
was kind of an expectation, but honestly, I learned so much, in being able to, frankly, be a better manager, manage my
Mhm.
products better, and honestly deliver better to the client, I think, in many ways, because it forced you to think about flip it up. Well, you're a business, and what are you serving to the client, and how are you meeting their needs, and things like that. It was a little bit different, but very educational. And I definitely always say that now, that I'm thankful for that experience, because I think it's helped me in my career.
So let's before I move on, because I want to talk a little bit about your transition to ERC, and then of course how that eventually you ended up leaving and starting Global IQ. I guess before that, I do want to take, if we can, a quick pause. I do want to say thank you to the second sponsor of this episode, Lawfully, and I think you might actually appreciate this company. So Lawfully actually started as a mobile app to help individuals and families track their own immigration cases. So they are they're not a case management platform. They don't do forms. They actually aggregate and pull data from various government agencies. They have tons of data. And so they've actually helped to date over 2.5 million people track well over 6 million cases, because a lot of times people track multiple cases, of course, for themselves and their families. Last year, actually in 2024, they found out that they found users, they were going through their own data and found users that were tracking hundreds of cases, which seems questionable for a family. Turns out it was professionals. It was immigration lawyers and in-house professionals at companies using lawfully to track immigration cases for their employees or for their clients. And so that turned into a company or a product called Lawfully Pro, which helps immigration law firms, in-house mobility teams, and nonprofits stay on top of their cases across a bunch of immigration agencies, USCIS, NVC, Department of Labor, EOIR, to better address case status for, and answer questions, frankly, from whether it's your clients or your employees. So they've helped over 120 organizations who work with them, from small, big law firms to corporates who use Lawfully Pro. So for anybody who's watching or listening, please check them out. The website is lawfully, LAWFULLY.com. Check out their Lawfully Pro product. And, if you do talk to them, again, tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So thank you to Lawfully as well for supporting this this episode. So okay, Karen. So you spent all this time at Mercer, and you've been doing this now for almost 2 decades, right? Like up until
thanks for reminding me of that. But yes.
Hey, listen, I have to remind myself that I graduated law school well over a decade ago now as well. Time flies, but how much we've gained over the years, right?
For sure.
So, and you go and kind of switch gears a little bit, right? Because you go from being at a for-profit organization to joining Worldwide ERC, which is, for those who may not know, now it's called WERC, WERC. It's a member organization for the global mobility and relocation industry. It includes immigration law firms. It includes in-house global mobility teams. It includes companies that service mobility, all moving companies, compensation. And now there's pet insurance and pet moving companies. I mean, there's so many different players out there. And Worldwide ERC is an organization where you can be a member and you can go to conferences and events. There are resources. So when you joined this organization, what was your thought? What were you joining to do? Like, what were you excited about, kind of moving into this role?
Sure. So I think just to take the step back, so at Mercer, I kind of wrapped up my time there and I was kind of running overall the mobility data practice. So kind of it was the highest probably I would get from a data perspective in mobility because I was kind of overseeing the production and distribution and commercials of everything there. And then it was, I started to think, well, what else do I want to do? Right. So do I want to keep consulting? Do I want to go into broader HR? And, ERC had reached out and just, said, hey, we're just maybe thinking of a new role here. We want to take a new look at, what does the industry need? What products and services do we have? Do they need upgrading and things like that? And we want a fresh perspective from somebody that is a product type person that understands commercials and kind of the business side of doing some of these things. So it was kind of a nice transition to I think from going from, the commercial side with a very specific lens to going to the not-profit side with a much broader lens. So the products and services were much different. The membership was different. Now it was, what was it, when I talk about like the mobility ecosystem, compensation and benefits is one vertical. Now you were going to take a role from a not-profit membership, which I didn't really have experience with, but I did understand kind of products and commercials and things like that. Right. So it was kind of an exciting transition to really start looking at the industry through a completely different lens than I had before.
And kind of, it sounds like they really, I mean, you were kind of hired because of your commercial experience to say, look, I mean, and I always say this, people think nonprofit organizations have books, they have numbers, they have expenses. It's just that the corporate structure is slightly different because maybe you're not making money quite the same way or spending it quite the same way, but you have to run like a business. And frankly, as far as I've seen, some of the biggest and maybe most, I don't want to say successful, but kind of long-standing nonprofits do run like a business, right? They have to look at certain things that way. So it sounds like they brought you in and you came in to help them, utilize your experience and knowledge with that side of things to help ERC get better and to help the members, I guess, grow with data and whatnot. So what did you, what did you do over the years there? Because I want to get to the, kind of the tail end of your time at ERC, which is where this idea of global IQ and really bringing it back full circle came up. But what did you kind of really do there at ERC when you first joined?
Sure. So, and honestly, my role changed so significantly over the 5 years I was there. So, what I've said is kind of what I was hired to do. So,
Hmm.
we really did a deep dive on all of the CRP, the GMS, kind of all of the certifications and learnings. What were the profitability of the events? What did the member benefits actually, what did you get as a member? When things, so really looking at the commercials of that, but then also saying, what did the industry need?
Hmm.
And I think in that part of it, well, what did the industry need? I think there's certain things, as you do all these studies, there's a lot of things the industry needs, but what did the not for profit membership organization want to do for that? So I think that's kind of developed into, we started re-engaging corporates significantly again. And then looking at broader verticals, I mean, like you said, it's like you look at the ecosystem, it's relocation management companies, immigration firms, tech companies. So
Right.
the verticals had gotten more. And it's, how did we continue to say, okay, how do these offerings fit everybody under this one roof? So it was just being able to do that. And I think there's certain things that fit of what, I think ERC wanted to do. And then I for myself, and, we would get asked questions all the time, or I would get asked questions about, how do we do this better? How do we, and I think that's kind of when with GMI Rocket, it's like people say, there's nobody that does
X.
marketing
Yeah.
just for this,
Right.
so like, how do you build some of that expertise? And it was, you always would, people didn't know their marketing data. They
Right.
didn't know where their client data was. They had databases that didn't talk to each other. So like you kind of start hearing that even, and there's a lot of like smaller businesses within, mobility. I mean, there's certainly very large ones. So there was always this kind of fundamental piece of nobody has data, or they have data, they don't know what to do with it. And then it was like, well, there's no information on the size of the industry. There's no information on, how do we, there's gaps in information that people have. So I think we originally I started to think about that perspective of it. And then I kind of went back to my career before, and it was like, we were coming up on the age of like, more and better automation. AI was really kind of kicking in. It was like, isn't there a way to bring some of that in, do some of the fundamental data collection pieces using some of those methodologies, and then making all of that data more accessible and affordable to everybody, whether that's a corporate person or a service provider. So it was kind of this like really cool, ERC was great. And I think being able to just kind of understand the entire ecosystem, I think helped us kind of figure out like, well, there is room for another data provider, because we're not just kind of the lens that it was before. It's a little bit different.
And so what was that thing that, I've been a member of ERC for years, and obviously I've gone to many conferences and talked to many, many people across the board. And um, yeah, to your point, I mean, first of all, there are only so many things that any organization can do. I'm a member of several organizations that provide wonderful services, but there are gaps, and organizations do
Mhm.
as much as they can, but sometimes this is where small companies, to your point, like myself and yourself, pop up to address a particular need very well at the speed that perhaps the market needs, and maybe in addition to, or sometimes in conjunction with, the larger member orgs that do
Mhm.
that. What was, at what point did you think to yourself, all right, this is something that I want to do? Because to go back to my earlier question, you grew up, you and your sister were the first in your family to go to college, and you grew up kind of being really good at math, and thinking about career as a math. It doesn't sound like you grew up with somebody who ran businesses and that was something that was natural to you. But this is a big move to be a career person for over 2 decades, and then leave and start a
Yeah.
startup, basically, right? A tech company, a data company. What was the thing that really maybe pushed you to say, this is the time to do it? The market's ripe for it.
You know what? I honestly think a couple of things. I think COVID changed mobility,
Mm.
in many ways, right? But I think when people started going back to work and people started moving people again, it looked different from a compensation and benefits perspective. So it was, how do we tap into, broader markets, and, some of the research we've done before and even now, it's more and more companies are sending people globally, right? So, but they're not the traditional ones that are sitting at the, at the ERCs and things like that. They're HR generalists that are moving people and don't really know what they're doing. So I think a lot of it was this broader mobility. And those folks didn't have data. They didn't know where to get it. They didn't know how to access services. So, and I think that changing market kind of said, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. And honestly, I think getting back to we do a lot of consulting on a lot of different things, but it's all got, it's data and insights. So I think kind of bringing that all under one roof and kind of it's research, it's the core mobility data, but it's making it available to everybody to use however makes sense to them. And also, providing insights back to it. And I think that there was gaps there. So like you have data companies, you have consulting companies, but nobody was bringing those pieces. And then maybe some of that broader research and kind of that broader HR lens to kind of bring some of it together. So like we are a core data company, but like in many different ways than just the compensation piece.
And so I was going to ask you, this is a really good time for me to say, well, what is then Global IQ? What do you do? And, who do you serve? Who do you help?
Sure. So I will say, our client base is really broad-based. So we have multinationals that have massive programs. So, from that perspective, we're attractive, I think, in a way, because our data is more accessible and more affordable, frankly. So being able to send more people and your costs aren't going up tremendously from that perspective and things like that, and we have a lot of automation and AI. So they can pull our data into a lot of different systems, super easy. Our commercial model is super easy. You're not locked into things. So it's attractive in that perspective, I think, from using, some of those levers. We also work with a lot of like small to medium-sized companies that are either just going global or large companies that haven't gone global yet. And that's like their first two. So we do a lot of work with helping them understand mobility, understand policies, and helping them kind of understand maybe the benefits they should look at, where they're going from a location perspective. And I think a lot of our value too is, as we do a lot of that consulting, we have really good partners. So we kind of bring immigration, tax into our conversation with us. So, we do some broad-based consulting in that way, that we're kind of going soup to nuts to people that don't understand this business.
So if I just want to kind of have a scenario in my head. If I am a corporate and let's say I have a mobility program, whether it's large, small, medium size, at what point do I think about going to Global IQ? Is it leadership going to mobility and saying, hey, we need, like, what's going on with our mobility, team? I mean, what are the costs? And then they come to you or to help them analyze it? Is it, sure. We want to change our policies, and what's some benchmarking data? We don't know. Do I go to Global IQ? I guess in what instances do you fit into,
the
needs of an organization?
I think the two you've mentioned are two of our main businesses, right? So
right.
I think at the fundamental piece of it, it's how do I compensate people that are moving? So there is that, what's the cost of living? How much housing allowance should they get? What's a cost estimate look like? So it's some of those fundamental compensation pieces, but we also have a massive, benchmarking database. So, and we actually do benchmarking a little different. We look at, people's programs. Like, do you want to send long-term assignments, short-term, project-based, permanent transfers for everybody? So we kind of like look and do a lot of the benchmarking, kind of matching a lot of that to, the goals of their program. But then I think the other piece is we help people understand their data, or to your point, what's the cost of this program? What's the cost of making any of these changes? We use the data we have and whatever data they have to kind of help them understand, cost implications of changing their strategy, cost implications if they want to, all of a sudden, this is a big thing and they need to send a ton more people. How do they structure a new program to be able to achieve that under certain guidelines? So it's kind of, we call ourselves a data as a service company because it's, it's our data, it's your data, and it's kind of the, how do we help you with insights, surrounding all those pieces.
If I'm thinking about Global IQ's, unique value proposition, are you able to get data that other people don't have access to? Or like, you know what I mean? You said, okay, my data, fine. You plug in and maybe you get my HRIS data, maybe you get my immigration data, et cetera. You also, it sounds like you come with your own in a sense.
Mhm.
Where do you find that? I mean, unless that's your secret sauce, but where do you find that? How do you find that? Like if I'm thinking about, oh, well, I want to work with you, what's that special, aspect that you bring to the table?
I think our data is probably the most comprehensive because we have a lot of that core information, but something as simple as when you run a cost estimate, we've collected data for 30 different elements of a policy that you can kind of include, like immigration expenses, if you're doing US immigration versus, in Europe or something like that. So like we've kind of researched and worked with partners to gather information for all of those benefits. I think the other piece too is, so we've created a lot of, because again, we're data and numbers people, we've kind of built models to, help people look at program optimization.
Mhm.
So how does the people versus, like, how many people do you have internally versus using an RMC and a technology against certain, whatever policies you have and things like that. So it's kind of like we have built these numerical models to help people optimize those programs. And like there's numbers that we bring with that. So like we've got market research
Mhm.
that we have coming out, like on what's the size of our industry. So like, I mean, the mobility industry is almost $1 trillion
Right.
when you look at every single vertical, and
Right.
we've built models to kind of estimate that. So, all of that data we're able to kind of bring back to, help people even kind of size their own business, maybe look at kind of other things they can be doing or what their competitors look like. What does the market share look like? So those are things that just, are kind of outside of that core compensation piece. But as we work through this, we're a startup. So we're trying to
Mhm.
meet the market where it is. And there's a lot of data needs and a lot of data analysis needs. So kind of constantly trying to just build ourselves out to meet the market where it is.
What do you think? So, who would you want to kind of reach out to you, or I guess who would be the best person to get, because this is interesting, right? What's cool about this is there aren't, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but in maybe your size of an organization within our industry, I don't know that there's much competition. I mean, if people are looking around to see who can help them analyze data, and that's why Global IQ came up, that sort of means there was a hole, a gap in the market that you're filling. So, who would be sort of the ideal company or person or organization to come to you now where you have the capacity to service them and they could really get something from by working with you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, we work with a lot of corporate HR and we also work with service providers. They're just two very different ways of working. So I
Sure.
think, and it's everybody's needs are a little different. So we do, segment ourselves in that way. But I think of, from a corporate HR perspective, as your programs are growing and, you're changing the comp methods to permanent transfers or local plus versus long term. And as you're trying to navigate and need data to compensate your people or analyze all of that, like people aren't always doing that work. And I think as, when you look at some of the internal teams for HR, they're getting smaller,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But so not everybody has the time to maybe outsource, do that work themselves to see the underlying data, see what the trends look like, or, coming up with ROI and, just kind of using their data, but also just some of the fundamental stuff as well.
Does
But
it
then
make
from
sense?
oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, does it make sense for you to partner with immigration law firms? Because
We do partner
immigration
with
law firms.
immigration law
Okay,
firms.
great. Perfect.
We
Perfect.
do. Yeah. I mean, I think it's twofold because one, I think as, everybody tries to, I think, broaden the conversation at least. So it's like, yeah, there's an immigration service conversation to be had, but there's also fundamental pieces around that. So what visas make sense? Why are they doing these policies? And I think from an immigration law perspective, we've actually kind of worked with through their clients who, again, they may not have a policy. They don't know what they're doing. They know they need to send an employee somewhere. So like we, might do some benchmarking or provide policy information to the immigration law firms to kind of help. So we don't always do the direct sale. We maybe provide information and data and services to them to kind of help them build out an immigration program attached to kind of a broader program. But we've also helped them use their own data. So not everybody has, you have your marketing data here, you may have other data here. It doesn't talk to itself. They don't talk to each other. So are there client analyses even that you can do to understand, what's your market share, what are your client demographics? Are you doing kind of all of some of that commercial piece?
And I'm also thinking when large companies do RFPs, because they do move immigration law firms from time to time, or they might be growing, they might have had a smaller practice or smaller firm, and now they were acquired or got a big influx of capital, and
Mm-hmm.
they want to find maybe a law firm that has experience building policies and programs and things like that, and really leveling up their mobility program. I
Mm-hmm.
imagine if I'm a law firm, maybe I'm projecting here because I want I want my audience that are immigration lawyers to to find these connections and hopefully reach out to you, right? I mean, this is the whole point of the show, to give and platform organizations that provide value, especially when it's different and unique like this, to the industry. I imagine in my head, I'm going through an RFP. I'm talking to a law firm about, or I'm sorry, to a company about the benefits I can provide. I would love to be able to say that we either partner with, or I don't know, white label. I don't know what kind of relationships you might have with a proprietary kind of mobility data analysis company or team to
Mm-hmm.
help you not just make sure that your moves are happening correctly, but to look at your program holistically as you're going to grow your program, to make sure you're doing it the right way. Like that to me sounds like a benefit, right? Yeah.
I think you hit the word there that we've been using a lot this year, holistically.
Mm,
And I think being able to partner and truly partner, not just say you partner, but
right.
really, and to your point, we white label our stuff. We will partner with, we kind of work whatever works for the
Mhm.
company, the business, the people, whatever, in that way, which I think makes it easy to work with us, frankly. But the holistic view, kind of bringing stuff closer to scope, I think helps the HR professionals or, business professionals doing the immigration piece and stuff like that, just kind of have a broader, more meaningful conversation by having that all together, as opposed to, well, let me go figure this part out here, this part here. If everybody's sitting kind of together and working that way, it actually, I mean, the projects we've done this year where we've been able to achieve that have been really amazing. I said, I think I've done some of the best consulting in my career this year.
Mm.
You say, why did you do this? Because there's pieces that I was missing, but the consulting we've been able to do this year, using data, providing insights, and kind of some of those partnerships has just really made it super fulfilling.
So kind of jumping off on that, and to kind of end with this question, you're starting a business. You've had this career over decades where you excuse me, were in this industry across different types of companies and organizations, et cetera. You see a gap in the market. Um, you're building a company though from scratch, kind of for the first time. I'm sure you're still learning a lot of things. You bring a lot of wealth of knowledge and information, but you're also learning. I mean, I know I did a ton
Sure.
about how do you do marketing, how do you do business development. How can I position this in a way that makes the most sense?
Sure.
What's some advice that you are listening to right now? Not advice that you would give someone, but what's advice that you're actively kind of maybe listening to right now, in this stage of global IQ?
That's an interesting question. I think, if I may, I think when we first started, it was listen to the market and don't let it change your business, but figure out how you continuously will fit into it. So I think where we thought we would be when we started this, and this maybe this little nugget of data pieces and kind of how we could help, but kind of meeting the market where it's at without changing yourself.
Mm,
And I think that's maybe still true because people come to us for a lot of things and we just can't be everything to everyone. So it's kind of keep, figuring out your role in that and figuring out where to bring in other partners or things, but staying true to kind of a core business and not just trying to do everything that everybody needs you to be because you're open to a conversation.
yeah.
But honestly, we've been able to bring in a lot and build ourselves to kind of have different buckets to meet some of those needs. But you've kind of got to weed through those conversations and kind of keep finding your space in it.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. With Laborless, we're lucky to have so many amazing clients, that we've built relationships with over the years. And sometimes it doesn't happen often, but they'll say, okay, great. When are you going to also do this? And immigration case management, CRM, and this and that. And, maybe because I know a lot of the companies personally who are doing this work,
Mhm.
I don't want to compete with them. I have no interest in doing that. They're great at what they do. We're great at what we do. We have our separate, verticals, and we actually partnered together and create a better, ecosystem that way than,
100%.
all of us trying to kind of cannibalize each other, and then everybody's sort of does a mediocre job for everybody else, and no one's really a specialist at anything. So I love that advice, and it's cool that you're still doing it, right? Because you launched Global IQ, at least I guess part-time, nights and weekends, over 5 years ago. Now you're doing it
Mhm.
full-time, of course. Um, but it's great to know that you do that. And I think that if people do want data and research and analysis for their mobility or broader HR, programs, they should come to you. So
Thank you.
with that, Karen, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Again, I know we've worked together and talked a lot over the years, but it was so nice to learn more about you, and I hope
Same here.
others have found the same. Where can people find you and or Global IQ?
So our website is www.global-iq-data.com. So a little bit of a mouthful, and yes, it has data in it because as a startup, we couldn't afford the URL for just Global IQ.
I get that.
So, it's a little bit longer than we'd like. But yeah, and I'm on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/Karen-Cygal. So
Awesome. Cool. And of course, I'll have linked to that in the show notes as well. So, Karen,
very
thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful conversation. And I'll see you at the next conference.
great. Thanks so much, Roman.
Awesome. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you everybody for your comments and for shout outs. Just wanted to say that if reach out to Karen. Karen's wonderful, and the organization's doing interesting work that frankly you can't find in most other places. So if you are a big law firm that partners with large corporations and you want data analysis as part of your offering, and or you're a company that wants to do some of this internally, definitely check out Global IQ, and of course connect with Karen. Huge thank you again to the main sponsor rather of this episode, 8am DocketWise. So again, for those who may not know, 8am DocketWise is an end-to-end immigration case management platform. So built specifically for immigration lawyers, but in-house immigration and mobility teams obviously can use DocketWise, and do use DocketWise as well to manage their cases, and their employees that are moving or relocating internationally. And DocketWise has immigration forms and questionnaires in every language you can imagine, integrations with billing and compliance and calendar tools, etc. And of course, as I mentioned before, DocketWise is just a great organization, in terms of what they do for the immigration industry, and the content that they create and how much they support, in my view, immigration lawyers and paralegals and law firms. So check them out. The website is 8am.com/DocketWise. Check out the link in the comments or the show notes here. Thank you, everybody. This may or may not be the last episode of 2025, because we are in the middle of December. If it is, see you in the new year. If I have a surprise final episode this month, see you in a week. With that, everybody, have a great weekend. Thank you for watching, and peace out.